Have you ever found yourself wondering, is this normal conflict or is something more controlling happening here? Or maybe you've looked back at your relationship, even at the negotiations in your divorce journey, and felt confused, guilty, afraid, constantly off balance, but you couldn't quite name why. If any of that feels familiar, this episode is going to be really helpful for you because today I'm joined by one of our amazing regular guests, Coercive, a clinical psychologist, and together we're going to unpack what coercive control really is, how it works, and why some people don't recognize it until long after it's taken hold or until you've left. And we're also going to explore what happens when coercive control goes beyond into negotiations after breaking up, and why coercive control goes far beyond physical violence and how these patterns create a power imbalance that completely reshapes someone's sense of self and safety. We're also going to talk about how coercive control impacts children and why leaving these relationships is so difficult. And something many of you have asked is how to tell the difference between a genuine negotiation and manipulation disguised as negotiations, especially during the divorce and court proceeding stages. Welcome, Coercive.
Welcome, Laura. Wonderful to be here again.
I love having you here. Now, if anyone wants to listen to any of the other episodes we've done, you can go and do those. Listen to this one first and then jump back and to listen to them because Coercive really explains things so well and it can be really reaffirming and comforting when you've been wandering out in the wilderness, not knowing what's actually going on with you. But a reminder, Coercive's not your psychologist. Mum's not here. She's not your lawyer. I'm not a lawyer or a psychologist. We're just here to discuss. And of course, please go and get your own legal advice. Please go get your own psychological support. Please call 1-800-RESPECT if you're experiencing any of this. And a reminder that we'll be discussing family violence. And if you do feel triggered by that, please call 13 11 14 Lifeline. Now, Coercive, let's get right into it.
Let's get into it.
Hello, I'm Laura, divorced mother of 3, and I'm here with my mother, Lynette Galvin, with 35 years' experience in family law. You're listening to the Divorce Course podcast. Through our candid discussions, we hope to help you through your divorce or de facto separation. We will be answering the most commonly asked questions and covering the stages and steps that you will face on your way to freedom. If someone's not quite sure whether or not they're experiencing coercive control, why is it important maybe they listen today? Because people don't just immediately come out, do they, and go, oh, well, I just experienced coercive control.
Yes, in fact, a lot of people, I think, have not heard the term coercive control until quite recently and until it started really getting prominence and it was recognized in the legal system, obviously starting from the UK. I think we think and use much more still the term domestic and family violence. And I think some of the issue with using that particular term is the word violence. Violence we naturally associate with physical violence, with some kind of physical force and physical injury being caused. And coercive control really recognizes that the biggest harm and the majority of the harm does not come from physical violence. And in fact, physical violence is more often absent than not in these kind of relationships.
Can you describe in really simple terms what coercive control is? We know it's not necessarily physical violence. So what is it?
Yes. Firstly, I have to say, even the Australian National Principles for Addressing Coercive Control, which were a couple of years ago, they recognize that coercive control is the underlying dynamic that underpins pretty much all domestic violence. Yeah, they said it explicitly there in the National Principles. So I guess a simple way of defining coercive control is that it is a strategic pattern of behavior. Strategic meaning it is intentional, it doesn't just happen by accident, and it is designed to exploit or take advantage of a person in a relationship. It is also aimed at controlling, creating dependency in that relationship, and dominating one person over the other. So I think that's the most simple way we can define it, a strategic pattern of behavior.
Why have we moved away from just a series of incidents? He did this or she did that, and then he did this, and then he did that. Why are we now turning to a pattern-based view?
Because an incident-based model is simply not fit or designed to be able to capture the complexity and the nuances of what we know coercive control is. Again, if we put physical injury aside and physical violence, a lot of the incidents that occur in coercive control, they're not criminal offenses. They're not something you can go to the police with. They don't leave visible sort of injuries. And I think it is that whole shift of understanding injury versus harm. Coercive control is incredibly harmful, but it doesn't necessarily cause physical injuries. Incidents are very much around identifying injuries and one-off sort of events that are significant enough, but they don't and can never recognize the full harm of a pattern of behavior.
So I think that's why it's really hard for some people to get their head around it, because we've always been told not one hit. And someone may say to you, well, if you're experiencing coercive control, where's the bruises? And so what do you kind of say to people who might be listening today who are like, I'm not sure, he's never hit me, he's never hurt me, but I'm afraid of him? What do you say to those people?
Well, I can say what I've heard quite often being said is, I wish he would hurt me, or I wish they would hit me, because then at least I have proof. I can see it with my own eyes. I can show it to other people. I can go to the police with something, or I can put a label to it. But again, the harm does not come from the physical injury. The harm comes from the exploitation, domination, and loss of autonomy over time. That's what's the harmful thing. And you can do that in so many different ways. Including through verbal abuse, through controlling, micromanaging the person, distorting their narrative. All of those are elements that have nothing to do with physical harm.
And so really the aim of coercive control in the relationship isn't to hurt you. What is it? What's the aim?
Yes, that's such a good point, because very often people will get stuck on, but they didn't mean to hurt me. They're not trying to abuse me. And that's not really what the ultimate goal of coercive control is. It's not the harm per se that is the goal. It is the domination. It's the control. It's the taking over of the relationship and kind of subjugating the other person to yourself in the relationship. That's the ultimate function.
It's horrible. And we're just kind of doing a nutshell bit, and then we're going to go into much depth about all of this. But how do you explain to other people, and I know I'm going way off script, you're going to hate me for this. How does someone explain to their friends or their family who've never heard of the word coercive control? They've heard of family violence. They know what the stereotypical domestic violence looks like. And how do they explain to the family when they say, well, I don't see any visible evidence of this. I don't see any harm. How do they explain to a family member or a friend or to themselves that they are actually experiencing harm through going through coercive control?
Yes, I think, first of all, when I think we've talked in the past about sometimes it can be quite difficult to explain that to people who don't have the understanding, because exactly you're looking for that bad enough incident to kind of present as proof, and it may not even exist. But it really is about, I feel completely disrespected. I feel put down. I don't feel treated as a person and as a human being in this relationship. I have no autonomy. I have no independence. I'm being treated as a child. I'm constantly being put down. Anything I say or raise is always seemed insignificant, and it's incredibly harmful. And I don't feel like myself. I feel like a shell of a person. I don't feel like an adult person in an equal relationship. Okay. I think that's the real harm that accumulates.
Yeah, and you're right. And I do know people listen to our podcasts who haven't left yet. They're trying to figure out in their head, is this in my head? Is this abuse?
Yes.
And I do know a lot of people, victim survivors, are waiting for one more thing to happen, one big thing, and then they'll leave. But when it comes to coercive control, there is sometimes never one big thing. The whole thing is one big thing. But because it's all little things, it's harder to wrap your head around or pinpoint it, like you said, the incidents versus the patterns.
Yes. Yeah. And also because we are an adaptable species as well. People are designed to adapt in order to survive. So what feels completely unacceptable today, over a period of time when those small things keep increasing, but slowly they can become normalized. They can become tolerable over time as well. So that's why if you can't figure out the bottom line and you keep waiting for that one big thing, and that can be different for different people. I know sometimes people have told me, if I find out they've cheated on me, that's it, and I'm gone. And somehow they might be able to put up with a whole range of harmful behaviors, but in their mind, that is the biggest betrayal, and that's going to be what gets them to leave. Whereas other people, they'll say that, but then when the thing actually happens, by that time, it's already been justified, it's already been normalized and kind of incorporated into the whole system, and it's still not enough.
Yeah. Let's go into what it looks like. We've talked about the 3Ds in a previous episode, and I'll put the link to that episode. But let's go through the three, because I love this. It really lists and really puts it out into real word terms. So it's not just wishy-washy woo. It's these things are happening and people can have a look. So as Krasi goes through it, guys, have a little think about what you're experiencing, and does any of it fall into this? So can you tell us a little bit about the 3Ds?
Yes, so the 3Ds is not a scientific sort of model. It's something that I have come up on my own as a way to try and really put a system around all these incredibly different behaviors and really make them a lot more palatable and understandable to people, rather than just saying emotional abuse, psychological abuse, and so on. So the 3Ds reflect, I suppose, the underlying function and dynamic of abuse in a relationship, and they relate to the elements of disrespect, the elements of disempowerment, and the elements of distortion that always occur. All of them occur in these relationships. So when we talk about coercive control, I guess the most obvious one I want to start with is the element of disempowerment, which is exactly that creation of dependence of that person within the relationship, the removal of autonomy, slowly really eroding their ability to make choices and decisions on their own. And this could be done with more obvious behaviors, such as making threats, angry outbursts, of course, using violence or physical sort of intimidation in any way, but it's not necessary. There are many different ways you can intimidate someone and create a sense of fear of consequences. This is where we talk a lot about micromanagement. And when I say micromanaging the partner, this is going way beyond what we would consider normal in terms of how we clean the house or how we set up certain home routines. This is very much about a regime that's being imposed in the family environment by the person, and there are significant consequences for whoever doesn't kind of adhere to that regime.
Do you see that disempowerment happening after separation in the post-breakup phase when people are going through the divorce process? Do you see that disempowerment happening there?
Absolutely. Well, that is absolutely the core of what we call post-separation abuse, and that idea that coercive control doesn't end when the relationship ends, because that need for control over the person and over the relationship is absolutely still there. It just changes shape and form. So first of all, coercive control predicts with about 90% accuracy that there is going to be post-separation abuse after the end of the relationship. So it's very common. And it is exactly because when the person feels they're losing their sense of power, they're just going to look for other ways to exert that.
I can think of an example. Someone messaged us about making the decisions for medical. They just had to take their son to, I think it was a psychologist or a dentist or whatever, but the ex who had been coercively controlling in the past was now saying, well, I will only pay if you do it exactly like this. You must go on this exact day, you must see this exact person, and you must say these exact things. And it basically dictating everything exactly how it must happen, or they won't help pay. Is that an example of continued coercive control disempowerment?
That is a perfect example, and I think we'll get to it also when we're talking about the difference between negotiation versus coercive tactics.
Okay, cool.
But that is a perfect example of how you can continue doing it even when it's completely unnecessary. It has no bearing to what is safe or necessary for children or for anyone. And it can look very unreasonable on the outside. People question, why would you even bother about? But it reflects that need to maintain control even when the person has left.
Okay. All right. What's one of the other Ds?
Yes, so the other D is disrespect. So this is very much about kind of making the partner feel like a second-class citizen in their own relationship, really applying these double standards where the abuser, the controller, kind of has all the benefits in the relationship. They get to do whatever they want, go whenever and whatever, spend as much money as they want for themselves or for their decisions, but the other person is not worthy of that kind of consideration. It's also about really criticizing, putting the person down, always making them out to be less than and a problem, kind of untrustworthy, unreasonable, stupid, not good enough. It's all the unequal contributions to the household tasks, or the really kind of gendered, often divide in the family. It's the long silent treatments, which are both punitive and disempowering, but also they do show the other person how little relevance they have in this relationship that you could just not talk to them for weeks on end.
Yeah. And I guess, is that this disrespect? I guess it's kind of like they have rules that you've got to follow, but there's no way you would ever do any of those things to them.
Yeah, absolutely.
They can do whatever they want, but you're not allowed.
Exactly.
They can call you names, but you're not allowed.
Yes, you have to tell every little spending and you have to give account for it. But if they choose to spend money, it might be any amount of sun, you can never question them. You make that an issue. So there is a very clear double standard. But also when it comes to the rules, also it's very typical that the rules in these relationships can be very arbitrary, in the sense that what is the rule one day can be completely the opposite the next day, right? So again, you have to be very careful with the budget. You're not allowed to spend anything on anything. And then you come back and you bought maybe a cheap t-shirt, right? And suddenly it's going to be a huge problem. Why would you buy the cheapest thing? Why are you wasting money on that? Shifting sense
Keeping
where
it
you can never...
uncertain of, okay, well, I need, if I follow the rules exactly, I won't get into trouble. But then you do get into trouble because they change the rules.
Yes, exactly, which is, again, another strategy of controlling a person, always keeping them on their toes, always making them feel like they're walking on eggshells and anything can change, anything can happen at any point. So that sense of walking on eggshells is probably one of the hallmark kind of experiences when you are in this relationship.
Yeah, that's horrific. Okay, and then the last one is distortion.
Yes, the distortion. And that's such a big one. And in a way that I feel like, because that's not in the same controlling sort of way, it doesn't really get talked as much about. And I think that's where we talk a lot about gaslighting, but it's so much more than that. It's just that whole idea of really kind of pulling the wool over the person's eye, really misrepresenting to them the situation, but also to everyone outside of the relationship as well, what's really going on. It's not just about lying and cheating and kind of outward manipulation. It could be even things like being nice one day and then being completely mean the other day and keeping the person completely confused, or when you're being mean, having such great justification or flipping it on them and saying, well, if you hadn't done this, I wouldn't be like that. Or why do you keep asking me always all those questions? That's why I have to be so defensive around you. And the other very kind of key element here is very much kind of presenting what is in any terms abuse, but presenting it as caring or necessary behavior. A lot of the controlling behavior gets really kind of packaged up as caring.
Like, oh, my husband loves me so much. He tracks where I go, when I go, checks the odometer on my car to make sure that no one's stolen it while I was had the valet parking, all sorts of things.
He'll come and pick me up every time after work because he doesn't want me to spend all this time on a bus.
Yeah. Or that's my husband calling for the 10th time to make sure I'm still where I said I would be.
Yeah, or even someone taking over the finances but being presented, I'm better with money, you're no good, you spend too much money, so I need to do it. May be completely not the truth, but presenting it as a necessary action out of necessity.
So they kind of wrap it up in a package that makes people think, oh no, this is a good thing, but it's
yes, or this is a reasonable thing.
This isn't,
it's not this, it's that. It's almost like the magician trick where they show you one thing and then suddenly it flips else, and it's the same. Just when you think you've spotted the abuse and you've kind of caught them in the act, you manage to do this flipping act on you where suddenly it becomes, you become the bad person that needs to apologize to them and they were the good people in all of this.
Now, I didn't actually ask you this before, but I want to ask you now. How do you know the difference between narcissists and coercive control? Because narcissists do this whole DAVO, the reverse victim deflecting thing. So how do you know if it's coercive control or if it's just a narcissist being a narcissist?
Well, first of all, they're definitely not exclusionary terms. Yeah. So a lot of people with narcissistic tendencies or narcissists will absolutely use coercive control in their relationships. And a lot of people who are coercive controllers, but they're not narcissists, they will have what we would consider narcissistic traits in the sense of being selfish, very self-centered, having very little empathy, and so on. So there is a very big overlap. But I guess what I would say is that's sometimes for me the difficulty with narcissistic abuse becoming such a popular term nowadays, that people get very kind of stuck on trying to figure out, is my partner a narcissist or not? And almost like if they're not a narcissist, then they can't actually be perpetrating abuse, or if they're a narcissist, they automatically have to be abusive, which again is not really the case. And I can tell you clinical psychological definition for a narcissist is very different from what is the common everyday use of the word in daily life.
Yeah. Okay. And then, so I guess when you look at some of these things, you go, oh, he just calls me names. It just puts me down and just has some rules around because I'm bad with spending money. When people say that to themselves, that doesn't seem so bad. That doesn't hurt you. Why is that such a bad thing? Why don't you just get a thicker skin and just deal with the name calling? What do you say to those people who say those kinds of things to themselves, let alone people who say it to them?
Yes. Well, again, I would say let's look at the whole pattern, because very often either there's going to be a lot more to the story once we start looking at the pattern, or it may turn out that there isn't that much more to the story. But I'd be looking at, again, things like how are joint decisions being made? Are you allowed to have a voice? Are you allowed to say no to things you don't like? Are you being taken care of when you're in a vulnerable position when you need to? Do you feel like there is respect? Do you feel your partner has accountability when things go wrong? What is the family environment like? Do you feel like you're walking on eggshells or not? So we obviously expand a lot more, because a small snippet never tells us the whole story. And people, like I say, can sometimes get very stuck on just a small snippet because they're trying to find a justification, or they don't want to see the big picture.
Yeah.
Maybe they're not ready, or maybe the big picture is just not obvious.
Yeah. A lot of people don't figure it out till they're well and truly gone and left the building.
Yes, but for very good reasons, because a coercive controller and abuser will work very hard to, like I say, pull the wool over your eyes and kind of flip the narrative and make you feel like you're the one that's the problem. So it can take a very long time to piece and have clarity about what's happening and piece the puzzle.
Okay. Well, what about kids though? If you've got kids and you're in a coercive controlling relationship, you might not realize it, so you might not realize the effects it's having on the kids. But once you leave, people do start to worry, oh my goodness, what effect is this going to have on my children, particularly when it continues on after separation. So how does coercive control affect kids?
It affects them. It affects them very much, and it affects them while they're still living in the house, and it affects them when the parents separate and they have to spend time individually. I really dislike the notion of children, and I think it was even in the definition for family violence, that children being witnesses to domestic violence, and that's what makes them sort of victims of it, because children are so much more than witnesses. They may be witnesses to incidents of domestic abuse, but in terms of overall, they're absolutely victims in their own right, and they're subjected to very similar things, whether they're being directly targeted or not. Children live in the same unsafe environment. If one person is constantly walking on eggshells, then everyone in that family is always walking on eggshells, not just the parent, but also the children. If there is a sense of unsafety in the house, then it's picked up by everyone.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, there was an interesting study they did some time ago where they looked at hypervigilance. They compared the hypervigilance of children who had come out from households where there was domestic violence, and they found that it was pretty much at the same level as war veterans. They displayed the same level of hypervigilance.
Poor kids.
Because being in an unsafe environment creates the same kind of response in people. If there is like I say, this kind of regime of control that is being imposed on the household by a coercive controller, then everyone in that household is subjected to that regime. If a person in a relationship is kind of doing the relationship through control, then they're probably quite authoritarian in their parenting as well with the children. If they have little empathy for a partner, it's quite unlikely that they will somehow have this huge empathy for their children as well. If they're not really interested in the needs of their partner and they're quite selfishly focused on their own, well, the same very often applies to the children as well.
Gosh. And I think, like you mentioned, the Family Law Act definition it mentions children who are witness to if they've had to clean up something afterwards. But you're right, it doesn't really mention just being in it. So how do you describe it so that you can put it in an affidavit, etc., of how you feel, how your children are, what your children are experiencing?
Yeah, it can be very hard because, and I have to be honest here, my experience of what I have seen is when people have tried to do that, is that it can really be used against them as well. Because very often what they're reporting and observing becomes kind of flipped as they're attempting to badmouth the other person, they're gatekeeping, the whole alienations, when in fact they're expressing very valid concerns, very reasonable.
We've got a really good episode, if anyone wants to listen to it, about how abusers use false accusations of alienation and how you can protect yourself from that. So it's a really good listen. If anyone's experiencing that, please go listen to that as well. Big hugs to anyone who's got kids going through this.
But can I say, Laura, sorry, can I just add in that vein of thought? I really want people to take away as well that there is one single factor that is an incredible buffer for children who grow up or have to go through this family environment, and that is having a safe, secure attachment relationship with one person. They need one person and a secure attachment relationship with one person. And that will really buffer a lot. It's obviously not going to erase and take away everything that they've seen and they've been subjected to, but it buffers.
They just need one good parent.
They need one good, attuned, present, secure parent.
And that's you, if you're listening. That's your job. And I'm sure you're doing a good job, the best you can. So, Krasi, the other thing that people have to decide is, I've got to leave. I've got to leave this situation. If they're experiencing coercive control, if they're seeing the effects it's having on their children, they go, I've got to leave. Why is it so hard for people to leave?
Yes.
Need to start doing your disclosure but have no idea where to start? Feeling overwhelmed about mediation coming up? Or just trying to deal with negotiating with a manipulative ex? Then you need to go to thedivorcecourse.com.au to go to the free resources section where you can get a mediation checklist, a disclosure checklist, a word salad, read a letter like a pro checklist, and also a before you go checklist. Get ahead and be organised and ready, as this handy checklist, along with the accompanying episodes of the podcast, will be perfect for you. All you need to do is go to thedivorcecourse.com.au and go to the free resource section and download the free checklists today. Why is it so hard for people to leave?
Yes, well, so many reasons. It's not just one reason. First of all, again, it can take a long time to make the leap from seeing this as a bad relationship or relationship issues to abuse in the relationship. So that can take a long time to get there. And even if you do get there, the fact is it can be very difficult to leave it. The whole point of the coercive control is to create that dependence and to take away autonomy, and leaving can feel almost impossible if you have very little access to money, if you know exactly what the consequences are going to. So that can make it difficult. Also, that fear that has been built up over years of being in this kind of relationship with the other person, they make themselves out to be very big and strong and all-powerful, and they would have said all the threats, and it's hard to not believe all of that.
They always say, my ex is so smart. My ex is the smartest person. You cannot understand how smart they are. And I just know I'm up against a losing battle before I've even started. And that's a psychological game that's being played. Yes,
they've absolutely made you believe that. And the fact is, you would be amazed how much people can see through that, or how much that can fall apart when it's really under scrutiny, or how unreasonable what they may have presented as reasonable to you may actually sound like in a court or in front of other people.
The minute the light's on, when someone shines a torch into it.
Yes, and they have to perform. They can really kind of be their own undoing, to be honest, after a while. But nevertheless, that does play into the difficulty of living. It's also, I think you mentioned it as well, but that idea of trauma bonding can make it very difficult. So trauma bonding is an attachment that really is predicated on the sense of big highs and lows. And because there are such lows, the highs can feel very connected to the low. So the person who's harmed you and who's created all of the uncertainty and unsafety is also the person who can completely take it away, this amazing environment as well for you. So over time, it's hard to distinguish the two. So many reasons to leave. Also, it depends on what kind of level of support the person has, what moment in life they're in. I know a lot of people wait for the right moment, maybe the children to grow up a little bit, or for them to have family nearby or have access to money.
And I guess one of the biggest, scariest parts, apart from just the leaving, which is a very dangerous time. And we do have a really good episode on how to create a safety plan. If you haven't done one and you are listening to this, I think it's a really good idea. If you just do it, you don't even have to write it down, but just go through the questions and create it in your head and call 1-800-RESPECT, of course. But one of the things that people hear is the horror stories of going through the court process with abusers. And look, Mum is not here today, and she would be saying that the court is getting better. They're being more alive to the issues. And look, to be fair, probably from the 80s, they are better than they were in the 80s. But
it's a low bar.
They've got a long way to go as far as I'm concerned. And people are afraid of, I can't get what's fair when I leave this because this may continue. And that's where I wanted to really talk to you about. People still might not realize that or they might not realize they're still being coercively controlled through the negotiations. And this whole dynamic continues once you leave. So firstly, don't lose heart if you're listening. There are ways we can get you through this. People can get you through this. We've seen many success stories. Krasi, I think you've seen many success stories.
Yes,
it can be done. You just have to be smart and get the support as well. Krasi, can you just tell, if anyone's listening today, they're still like, oh, I'm not sure if my ex was coercive controlling. Maybe, or they're worried, am I being coercively controlled through my negotiations? Do you know the difference between what would be just a negotiation and someone trying to coercively control you?
Yes, I think, again, it comes back to a very simple sort of distinction. So rather than just looking at the behaviors and what's happening on the outside, we always have to consider what is the function of this behavior? What is it aiming to do? What is the goal here? And with coercive control and coercive control tactics post-separation, the goal is always, I want to maintain control. It's this attitude of, it's only going to happen the way I want it to happen, or it's my way or the highway. And negotiations really are about how can we get to a resolution and move on from here. That's the function of negotiations. You might be in a process, let's say, like mediation, or literally two people sitting in a room talking, communicating, and supposedly negotiating. So on the outside, it looks like two people talking and negotiating, and it's easy to say, see, there you go, that's negotiation. They're talking to each other. They're trying to come to a solution. But that's not enough. That's just what it looks like on the inside. What we want to look at is, but do they seem to have the same goal of trying to find a solution? Or is one person so rigid and stuck and so unreasonable in what they're wanting that there's no way this is going to move forward?
So when we talked about the 3Ds before, and I guess we see this all the time. They say my ex, like, is a professional, turns up in a suit, is a really well-respected person in the community, says, I'm trying my best, I'm trying to negotiate, but she's just being so difficult, or he's being so difficult. And it's really hard for those people to point out to others, no, he's not trying to negotiate properly. He's still trying to make my life hell. It's really hard to point that out. Or it's even hard to point it out to themselves. So let's talk about your 3Ds in this scenario.
Yes. And I think you're right. Sometimes, I think most often people very well know that they're being abused or coerced or trying to be controlled here. It's just that what they see and what they know, because they know the history, they know everything about this person. They've become experts by now in the way they operate, so they see it. But other people, outside people, whether it's a lawyer, a mediator, or dispute resolution, or even a judge, there seems to be this assumption when they come into this process that everyone is here just to get an outcome, a fair outcome, and we can move on, and we all have the best interest of the children at heart. And that assumption just doesn't apply when you're dealing with an abusive personality. No. That is not what they're there for.
Yeah, they haven't figured out, oh, wait, not everybody's like me. Some people have vindictive, horrible thoughts, and they want to make people get revenge.
Yes, and the goal is control, not moving on. But let's have a look at how those 3Ds would apply, because they absolutely can apply to negotiations / coercive control tactics. So, for example, if we start with the disrespect, what it's going to look like in the negotiation process, it's when, again, there is this critical, patronizing tone in the communication. And I think everyone I know, I've seen my fair share of these kind of letters, including coming from the lawyers, where it feels like they're literally talking to a child and they have to explain how this works. Yes. It's also applying those double standards. What seems to be okay for the abuser completely does not seem to be okay for you, and it can be so blatant sometimes.
Oh, we see that with kid pickup, that they'll be like 7 hours late. And if you're 1 minute late, then
exactly.
you get a barrage, like a big letter from the lawyer. How dare you, blah, blah, blah. So, okay, it's the same kind of thing again.
Yes. And even the silent treatments that I was mentioning in the disrespect in general, silent treatments here are exactly ask a question, maybe something about the children, or they need to respond to something in a certain time frame, and there's just crickets on the others. No matter what you do, you get no response. So it's this intentional silence.
I'm glad you raised that, because we did a quiz, a divorce personality quiz, and we've got avoidant, amicable, high conflict, and manipulative, controlling. And some people say, oh, my ex is a mix of manipulative, controlling, which is the coercive, and avoidant. And sometimes we're saying, are you sure they're just not deliberately not speaking to you to continue to control the situation?
Exactly. So that silent treatment or avoidance can fall under the disrespect, but it also goes under the disempowerment, because you can really stall things. You can really prevent any negotiations from going forward, which is exactly the opposite of what people should be doing. If they're genuinely interested in continuing the process and settling it, they wouldn't be delaying constantly all the documents, the financial disclosures, and so it doesn't even make sense. But the disempowerment in these situations also is obviously all the threats that are then made through legal kind of channels at this point, really setting the pace on their terms. So that's, again, not responding, not providing information, or doing the opposite, having these very short time frames, just very kind of pressure-inducing demand.
Yeah, we see that.
Have to.
Yeah, we see that with mediation. They won't. I'm not doing mediation. I refuse to see that. And then all of a sudden, boom, they've picked a mediator. That we're doing mediation with this person next week, whether you like it or not. And if you don't do it, that means you're not being genuine about settling. And it's that, again, double standards, double rules, and really ripping the carpet from underneath the other person who's just desperately wanting to settle.
Exactly. And one other thing, and I think that probably happens a lot in mediation, which is why it almost, I think probably very often doesn't go anywhere, is that they are very rigid in their discussions. And again, just because someone's sitting there talking doesn't make this negotiation. Negotiation makes it when people are willing to kind of be flexible in their position and move some way.
Yeah.
But they don't. I've heard of mediations where someone just literally for 5 hours will continue demanding one thing and one only, and they will absolutely not consider anything. And it just becomes a waste.
Another tactic I have sadly heard, and if you are interested in doing mediation, listening to the mediation or manipulation episode, but when in that we talk about how sometimes they will get you to compromise on all of these things because you think they're going to agree at the end to the whole thing, but then they don't. But then they've got you agreeing to all these compromises. It's kind of like a strategy again of this, disempowering, because it's not a fair, it's not an equal negotiation.
It's not. And that's not the desired outcome. And also, I think under this category would fall a lot of attempts, again, to negotiate, but really on things that should no longer, they feel like micromanagement or interference with personal life. For example, where can we go on a holiday necessarily with the children, or how exactly a child's birthday party is going to be celebrated. Those are not things that should really be negotiated on, because they're outside of the scope now that we are no longer in a relationship, but they'll get very stuck on them and they'll keep pushing points on that, which really kind of stalls everything, and it makes you feel like, I remember with one of my clients, during the negotiation sort of mediation stages, she was being repeatedly told that she has to demonstrate every single day sobriety, for example, which at that point she had been sober for over a year. The court was not demanding anything, but she had to personally send her results to her ex-husband, no one else. He demanded that because he didn't believe her. Well, that's not how this works. You don't get to set that as a...
That's not great. Yeah. And I think we've heard of a lady who, even though there was DV and there was a protection order and the children weren't seeing the father, he was demanding a update every day of how the children were, even if they weren't sick or anything, just an everyday update. And she'd been constantly sending these messages every day, beholden to him, until she spoke to Mum, one of the Q&As, and she's like, maybe you need to check out 61 DAB, I think it was, 61 DAB. So if anyone's in that situation where they're just constantly getting these rules thrown at them, where they feel like they have to be beholden, because I do think they use the children as a way to make you think that's their right. You have to.
Well, I'm glad you say that, because that is exactly the distortion element as well that comes into there. For example, completely unreasonable demands are being presented as very reasonable and very rational demands. And then the moment you kind of push back on it and say, no, I can't do that, or that's too much, then suddenly the blame gets shifted and you're being called unreasonable or uncooperative. Or these micromanagement tactics are being presented as communication about the children.
Yes.
And so you feel obliged to respond to everything, even though it's again about control. It's not about anything helpful. So again, framing also their demands and their expectations as acts of care under the guise of parenting acts of care, very common aspects of the distortion.
So it's now that you've separated, instead of, oh, they're basically stalking me because they care so much about me, now they're basically stalking the kids because they care so much, but it's not that. It is
still being relevant, being present, having the ultimate decision point in your life, even during the separation.
What can people ask themselves if they're listening today to kind of go, is this coercive control still, or is it just negotiations?
I think a simple sort of kind of asking yourself, okay, this behavior that I'm dealing, what they're asking of me, is that geared towards bringing us closer to a resolution and moving on? Or is that really about managing my life or managing me? What is this about? Because if you ask it from that perspective, you very often see, well, actually, if we keep doing this and going down that way, we're just extending the process. We're not moving towards a resolution. It's just about them controlling me, versus other things can be seen differently.
And I think with distortion, as we've just talked about, if you can lift the veil on that, and like you said, a lot of it's seen as practical, reasonable, legal requests. But if you can educate yourself and get your head around what is legally required, what is the practical legal request, lift the veil on that distortion and see it for what it really is. And you can do that by educating yourself. And we've seen so many people do that, haven't they? They're going, wait, no way.
Exactly. And I guess in some ways, that's why when you're in the post-separation phase, you do have that legal framework that can kind of define very black and white what is reasonable and possible and what is not. Whereas when you're still within the relationship, you don't have a legal framework to refer to of what is appropriate and reasonable in a relationship or not. Some things are obviously not, but for most you don't. So use that knowledge.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it's seen in this coercive control after separation, like you said, post-separation abuse, legal abuse. I've done an episode with Mum on what is legal abuse and when it doesn't end, what can you do about it? And the courts are starting to pay attention to it. They've brought in some new changes. So go and listen to that episode if you want to get your head around what you can do to protect yourself from that as well. But I think today's episode really, Coercive, and I always love it when you come on because it just makes things click for our listeners. It clicks. And then you're like, oh, people are more understanding of what they're facing so that they're better equipped to face it. So what would you want? So there will be definitely people listening today. I've had messages from people who say, I listen in the bathroom at night when my husband's gone to sleep. I've got people who've said, I listened to your episode with Coercive and I realized I was in an emotionally abusive relationship. So what can you say to anyone listening today that may have just gone, oh, I do experience disrespect, disempowerment, and distortion, and I am going through coercive control? What would you want to say to them today if they were one of your clients?
Yes, well, I think I would like to really reinforce to them that manipulation always goes hand in hand with abuse because it really tries to hide it from plain sight and it robs you of the ability to resist it. And autonomy and respect should be a given in any healthy relationship. They're not something to be earned or pleaded for in a relationship. And if you don't have this in your relationship, then please know it is not because there is something wrong with you or you're not trying hard enough. It means there is something wrong in the relationship and the way you're being treated. So I want to make that very clear to people because that is one of the biggest barriers to seeing it and making decisions.
Yeah.
The confusion.
And what kind of practical steps? What can they do first emotionally? What can they do once they've figured this out? What kind of steps would you say to take?
Yes, well, just because you figure it out doesn't mean it's easy to hold on to that clarity. So I would like to first say fight and fight hard to gain, but also to hold on to that clarity about your relationship and what your partner is doing, because it very easily slips. And this is when you become more vulnerable. So what that means for you, it might be reading things, connecting with a community and society where other people have experienced the same. It could be really opening up and sharing with friends and family. It could be kind of making a list of all the things that have gone up, but you need to hold on to that clarity because it waxes and wanes over time.
It's so funny you say that because I knew a lady who, yes, she'd been going through it for years, but she'd just kind of forget about it, or things would go back to normal, or it would be nice again. And then something would happen and then she'd wake up from it and go, what am I? But one day she wrote some stuff down and she kept something in a book hidden. And the second time that it happened, she opened up the book and reread the things and realized, no, this keeps happening. This isn't just a one-off. This is a thing. Because they say that they tend to forget, like it gets pulled out of your head somehow.
Absolutely. And there's so many reasons, and I'm not going to go into it. And it could be your own stuff kind of getting in the way. It could be because they're absolutely very actively working on creating this fog and confusion. It might be also because of the lack of understanding and knowledge from some people around you. There's so many factors that go. And that's why I say you have to fight for it. You can't just because you've seen it once doesn't mean that in a few days' time you'll be just as convinced and strong on that position, especially once the post-separation stuff happens and you start getting all the lawyers and just that incredibly twisted narrative, which I guess that's someone's job to do. It doesn't make it easy.
It doesn't make it easier if it's written in a document that's written by some other person with stamps on it.
Exactly.
It looks like a book.
With all the authority of the law behind it.
And I guess that happens in a lot of cases because most cases that go to court are DV or coercive control. And they really are two completely different stories when you look at the affidavits next to each other. And so the distortion of reality there is huge. And that's where they will all start to second guess themselves. And the lawyers, as much as I love the lawyers that help our ladies and our men, we call it, are they legal gatekeeping? And there is an episode, go listen to that, where the lawyers want you to pull things out. They say, no, that's not really abuse, or that's not such a big deal. Take that out, or let's not mention it.
Laura, can I say, I have had when I was writing a report for one of my clients, I have had a lawyer tell me directly, but we don't really want to use the word coercive control there in the report because the louder we yell coercive control, the less they're going to hear us in court. And that was her instruction to me.
What?
This was a lawyer.
Yes.
And I didn't know what to say at that point. I literally said, well, what do you expect me to call it? Because there's only one word for it. How else am I supposed to call it?
Mum has taken us through how to put your story of coercive control into writing. That is a really good episode as well. Go listen to that. But I guess like Mum said, you've got to show, not tell. But when it's coercive control, it's coercive control. So don't lose heart from those stories, though, because there have been cases where they've been sent back to court because they've ignored things. So it is getting better, but there's still a long ways to go.
Yeah.
Coercive, have you got any last messages for anyone listening today who's just gone through this and gone, holy moly, I just waded into my hell?
Yeah, look, people know what they're dealing with, so it's not news to them. I do want to offer hope. I do want to let them know that for all the people who seem not to understand you, there's just as much people out there who absolutely get it. They understand it. We work in the professions around that. We are your friends. We are your family members. We all want to support. There is absolutely a way through this. There is a light on the other side, and it looks so much better when you have, again, your autonomy and sense of self, and you don't have to walk this journey alone.
Mm-hmm.
This was never meant to be a one-person sort of job, so please lean on to your support network, reach out to your village. I promise you there are people there who will absolutely want to be a part of your journey.
Yeah. And speaking of that, Krasi, you do a workshop, don't you?
Yes, well, that's exactly why I designed that workshop, because I did want to create that space and I was having difficulty finding and offering that for people that are. So this is a workshop. It is only for women and it runs every few months. So the next one is in person in Melbourne in May, the beginning of May. But it is exactly a workshop around really understanding these dynamics, discussing how can you protect yourself, what are the do's and don'ts, how do you deal with post-separation abuse, and doing it in a small, safe environment with other women so that you can have that sense of shared experience and connection.
That's so wonderful.
Yeah.
Absolutely love that. So if anyone's interested, I'll put the information in the show notes, but just quickly, Coercive, your website address is?
It's curablepsychology.com.au. If people type in my name, it's going to come up. And there's plenty of resources there that I've put on post-separation abuse, but also coercive control, emotional abuse. And
again, like we said, we've got so many other episodes I've touched on during this episode that you can go listen to if you are experiencing any of that. Coercive and I are here for you. Mum is here for you. Big hugs to you if you're listening today. And let's help you get through it. And thank you, Coercive, for your time today. And hopefully we'll have you on again.
Thank you so much, Laura. Always a pleasure.
Thank you, Coercive. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
If you found this podcast helpful, we'd love it if you could rate, review, and subscribe. By doing so, you are spreading the word to help someone else just like you. Lynn would like to remind you that this podcast is general advice only, and you should always get legal advice in relation to your particular situation. And remember that the Australian laws may have changed since recording